Night Chill Audio presents Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Written in 1994 by John Barrett, read by James Ross Spencer. Chapter 9, A Walking Streak of Sex. And so it happened that I spent that extraordinary evening in Mercer House in the company of Jim Williams and his Fabergé trinkets, his pipe organ, his portraits, his Nazi banner, his game of psycho dice, and briefly, but memorably, his tempestuous young friend, Danny Hansford. Well, what did you think? Joe Odom asked me when I stopped in at Sweet Georgia Brown's afterward. I think I met the young man you found in your bed, I said. The one with the tattoos and the fuck you t-shirt. He works for Williams. So that's who it was, said Joe. He must be the kid who drives that souped-up Camaro that's always parked in front of Mercer House. He hot rods in all over town, whips around the squares like they were his own personal Indy 500. Danny Hansford was unknown to most of the residents of Monterey Square. At best, he was a nameless presence, someone seen entering and leaving Mercer House, parking and taking off in his black Camaro, wheels a-squealing. One of the few people who had met him was an art student named Corinne, who lived on the top floor of a townhouse just off the square. Corinne had soft white skin and a tumbleweed of autumn hair. She designed her own clothes, which were always black and usually emphasized her best features, her bosoms, and her buttocks. She breakfasted regularly at Clary's drugstore, and she was not ashamed to admit that she knew Danny Hansford. He's a walking streak of sex, she told me. Corinne had watched Danny from afar long before they had even spoken. He was in his late teens, she surmised, roughly her own age. She was thrilled by his lean, muscular body, his tousled blonde hair, and his tattoos. She walked particularly taken with his walk, a cocky strut that said, "Fuck you," as bully as the t-shirt he wore so often. He was a motion study in energy and turbulence, never looking right or left or acknowledging the presence of other people on the street, except on one occasion that she vividly recalled. She was crossing Monterey Square one afternoon when she heard the roar of Danny's Camaro coming down Bull Street. She quickened her steps so as to put herself in front of Mercer House as he pulled up. He bounded out of the car and came face to face with her. He smiled shyly. Corinne congratulated herself on having put on a skin-tight jersey top and a skimpy skirt that morning. She stood squarely in his path and said hello. She asked if he lived in the big house. "Yeah," he said, "I sure do. Want to come in and see it?" "You bet I did," Corinne told me, months later in Clary's drugstore as she recounted in precise detail what happened after that. She followed him up the walk. She said her eyes fixed on the seat of his jeans, the back of his t-shirt, his arms. But when she stepped into the cool vastness of the entrance hall, she forgot momentarily about all that and gaped in silence at the sight before her. The spiral stairs, the portraits, the tapestries, the crystal chandeliers, and the gleaming furniture. "Good God," she murmured. Danny stood with his hands in his pockets, rocking on his heels and eyeing Corinne. He had a boyish face, a pug nose, and sensuous lips that seemed to be fighting back a grin. "All this shit comes out of castles and palaces," he said. "This is a castle," Corinne replied to an odd whisper. "Yeah," said Danny, "and it's worth a couple $1,000,000 too. Jackie Onassis tried to buy it off us once. She was the president's wife, you know, but we told her it ain't for sale, lady. Man, we told that Jackie Onassis to fuck off." Danny laughed at the idea of it. He scratched his chest, hoisting his t-shirt slightly and revealing a glimpse of washboard stomach. "Come on, I'll show you around." They were alone in the house. As they walked from room to room, Danny gestured at the portraits on the wall. "All these guys are kings and queens," he said. "Every damn one of them. And the metal stuffing's gold and silver, too. Man, we got burglar alarms all over the place. Anybody tries to break in here, man, they're going to get the shit kicked out of them. I hope I'm here when somebody tries it. Yeah, 'cause nobody fucks with me and gets away with it." Danny cut the air with a karate chop, and then quickly kicked the imaginary intruder. "Hunga, chung chung, eat that motherfucker." They moved into the dining room, where Corrine paused before an oil portrait of a periwigged gentleman in a ruffled neckcloth. "Who's that?" she asked. Danny looked up at the painting. "That fat sumbitch up there, he's a king like I told you." "The king of what?" she asked. "Oh," Danny shrugged, "the king of Europe." Corrine started to say something in reply, but caught herself. Danny glanced at her with a look of uncertainty and then abruptly headed back into the living room. "Hey," he said, "let you and me have a drink. Then maybe we can go upstairs and shoot some roulette. Would you like that?" He poured 2 tumblers of vodka and handed one to Corrine. Before she had taken 3 sips, he had drained his glass. He looked at her with an impish grin. "Come on, let's go upstairs." In the ballroom on the 2nd floor, they spun the roulette wheel a few times. Then Danny pounded out a crude rendition of Chopsticks on the pipe organ. Finally, he brought her into the master bedroom and took a plastic bag of marijuana out of his pocket. He rolled a fat joint. "I got the best shit in Savannah," he said. "You can ask anyone. That's what they'll tell ya. Danny Hansford's got great shit. It don't come any stronger. I grow it in the garden out back and dry it in the microwave. It'll get you off for sure." They smoked the joint. Corrine felt herself becoming lightheaded. "Do you like me?" Danny asked, a note of tenderness in his voice. "Uh-huh," she said. He pulled his arm around her and stroked her back with both hands, caressing her throat lightly with kisses and sending a shiver down her spine. They tumbled onto the 4-poster, and he began kissing her breasts while at the same time pushing her skirt up and pulling down her panties. She reached down to remove her shoes, but before she could do it, he was pressing against her, probing with his fingers, gently and insistently. With the other hand, he unzipped his fly. He took her buttocks tightly in his hands and pulled her toward him as he thrust into her. She breathed the salty smell of his T-shirt and felt his belt buckle rubbing against her stomach. The rising body heat enclosed them like a steamy towel. It was over soon. He raised his head and looked at her. "Hey, that was great, wasn't it, huh? You liked that, didn't you?" "Uh-huh," she said. "Maybe next time we can even take our clothes off." Corrine was not taken in by Danny's pretense of being the squire of Mercer House. She knew, as everyone in Savannah knew, that Jim Williams owned the house, but she played along because the charade seemed to put spunk in Danny's swagger. Corrine sighed convincingly when Danny showed her the Jaguar XJ12 parked in the garage. She gasped when he opened a dresser and showed her his golden watch and his royal cufflinks. Corrine looked at him starry-eyed as they stood in the entrance hall saying goodbye. She told him she adored his castle and that he was a very handsome and sexy Prince Charming. Then the front door opened and Jim Williams walked in. "Hey, sport," Williams said. He was in a cheery mood. "We have just been leaving," Danny mumbled. "What's your hurry? Stay for a drink. Introduce me to your pretty friend." "We already had a drink," said Danny. His mood had turned sullen. "Well, it won't hurt you to stick around a few minutes and be sociable," Williams replied amiably. "There's always time for that." Williams introduced himself to Corrine, and they walked into the living room with an air of such self-assurance that Danny and Corrine followed as if summoned by decree. Corrine told Williams she was a student at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Williams responded by telling several gossipy tales about various members of the SCAD faculty, much to Corrine's amusement. Danny sat on the edge of his chair, glowering. Williams lit up a King Edward cigarillo. I assure Danny had taken you on a tour of the house, he said. Did he show you how to play psycho dice? No. Ah, then allow me. He took Corinne over to the backgammon table and sat her down. He explained the rules of the game and said that by concentrating on the dice, a person could improve the odds. He told Corinne about the scientists at Duke University and how their experiment had proved that if you really focused your mental energy, you could make things happen, in dice or in just about anything. He glanced over at Danny, who was still sitting glumly in his chair. Now see, for example, William said slyly, if we both put our minds to it, I mean really concentrate, we can probably get Danny to get up out of that chair and make himself useful by fixing us a drink. Danny got up wordlessly and left the room. Moments later, the front door slammed with a house-shaking wallop. Corinne jumped in her seat. Williams hardly flinched. He arched his eyebrows and smiled a bemused smile. I guess the message was received, he said, and returned to sender. He shook the dice and tossed them onto the green felt board. Half an hour later, after having a drink with Williams and playing a few rounds of psycho dice, Corinne left Mercer House. Danny was standing by the curb, leaning against the fender of his black Camaro, his arms folded across his chest. Without taking his eyes off her, he reached down and opened the passenger door. Get in, he said. It was late afternoon. Corinne had errands to do and plans for later on. She glanced at Danny's jeans, his T-shirt, his arms, and the smile that was beginning to creep across his face, and she got into that car. Danny made a ceremony of holding the open door and closing it politely. He walked around it and got in. Corinne patted his arm. Okay, sport, she said. Now maybe you can tell me why you left in such a hurry. Danny shrugged. I don't like nobody making moves on a girl I'm with. Is that what you think Jim Williams was doing? Yeah, and I don't go for that fucking shit. Let me tell you something, said Corinne. I'm pretty good at knowing when someone's making a pass at me. Jim Williams was not making a pass. He was being a wise ass. He was letting you know who's boss, she said. Danny turned the key in the ignition. Same difference. And like I said, I don't dig that shit. He threw the car into gear and floored the accelerator. The car shot out from the curb with an ear-piercing squeal. Corinne grabbed the dashboard to brace herself. Jesus Christ, she said. Danny swung around the corner of the square. A cloud of bluish-white smoke hung over the street in front of Mercer House. Buckle up, Danny shouted. You're going to have the ride of your life. No, I'm not, Corinne answered. Let me out now. Later, he said, and don't worry, I ain't going to kill you. I'm a great driver, and this is the hottest damn car on the road. This baby is supercharged. Danny was smiling triumphantly. His eyes were bright. His self-confidence had returned. If he was not exactly the master of Mercer House, at least he was king of the road. Corinne breathed a sigh of resignation and settled back for the ride. Okay, she said, where are we going? Out to Tybee, he said. I want to show you something neat. They sped east on the Island Expressway toward the beach. Corinne looked at Danny, sizing him up. She preferred this cocky mood over the sullen one. So tell me, what's your connection to Mercer House and Jim Williams, she asked. I work for him, he said, when I feel like it, odd jobs and shit. Well, that sounds more like it, she said. You didn't strike me as the stately Holmes type. I make good money, don't you worry, and if anybody hassles me, I'm gone, man. I don't take any shit. So I noticed. Yeah, hey, I almost knocked that door off its hinges when I hauled ass, didn't I? I bet Jim was pissed. I wouldn't say that, said Corinne. I think he got a charge out of it, which I thought was a little weird. The bridge to Tybee Island lay up ahead. Danny suddenly gunned the engine and picked up a burst of speed. He swooped around the car ahead of him, leaving an open stretch of roadway to the bridge. Hang on now, he said. This is where we really take off. The car accelerated like a rocket. With a whoop, it hit a swashback bump in the road, and all four wheels lifted off the ground. Airborne, Danny howled. Jesus Christ, Corinne muttered as the car bounced back onto the road. Is that what you brought me out here for? Yeah, neat, huh, said Danny. Corinne brushed the hair out of her face. I need another drink. They continued on to the DeSoto Beach Hotel, a somewhat seedy oceanfront motel that was popular with the young crowd. It had an open-air lounge with a pool, a rock band, and a tropical-style bar with a straw hut roof. They ordered pina coladas and sat on the seawall to watch the surf and the people strolling on the beach. Within minutes, two good-looking young men came over, friends of Corinne's, a fellow student at the Savannah College of Art and Design. While they talked, Danny remained silent. He became increasingly restive. He looked up at the beach and down the beach. He fidgeted. He sighed. As soon as Corinne's friend said goodbye and walked away, he stood up. I got an idea, he said. Bring your drink. We're going back into town. That was fine with Corinne. She had things to do anyway. You're not planning to fly over that bump again, I hope, she said. Nah, it only works in one direction. They got into the car and roared out of the parking lot, leaving a billowing black blast of gravel and dust. Did I detect a teeny bit of jealousy back there? Corinne asked. No, You didn't think they were making moves on me, did you? They were a couple of assholes is what they were. Corinne did not answer. She was comparing Danny with her two friends. The other two were more clean-cut than Danny and better educated, too. Their families had money, and their futures were pretty much assured. Those two were probably not unlike the men she would eventually marry, whoever they might be, but neither one of them had a fraction of Danny's sex appeal. She looked at the Confederate flag tattooed on his arm, at his flat stomach, at the way he gripped the wheel with one hand and rested the other lightly on his upper thigh. He looked back at her and smiled. Hey, he said softly, you know what? On the way back to town, I'm going to take you to the most beautiful place in Savannah. It's my favorite place to get high in the whole world. He turned off Victory Drive and drove down a winding road through the gates of Bonaventure Cemetery. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees and cast soft, lengthening shadows. They walked down an avenue of oaks smoking a joint. Dreamy, isn't it? Said Corinne. Yeah, said Danny. What do you think about when you come here? She asked. Dying, he said. She laughed. I mean, besides that, being dead. That's horrible, she said. No, come on, really. I told you, I think about dying and being dead. What do you think about? I think about how peaceful it is. I think what a wonderful place this is to come and visit, to escape from everything, to just cool out and relax and enjoy the serenity. But I never think about the dead people. Looking at these old graves makes me think how generations after generations of the same family are all gathered together, and that makes me think about how life goes on, but not about dying. I never think about dying. Well, I do, said Danny. I even think about what kind of grave I'm going to be buried in. Like, see them big old tombstones over there? They belong to rich people. And see them other ones there, the little ones? Those are for poor people. If I die in Mercer House, I'll get to have one of the big ones. What a creepy thing to say. Jim Williams is rich, said Danny. He'd buy me a big tombstone. There was nothing joking or boastful in Danny's voice. He was simply speaking his mind. But you're not getting ready to die, are you? Why not? I ain't got nothing to live for. Everybody has something to live for, she said. Not if they're fucked up like me. Corinne sat down on the moss-encrusted pedestal of a tall obelisk. She took Danny's hand and pulled him toward her. He sat down next to her. We all have problems, she said, but we don't go around bumming people out talking about dying. I'm different, said Danny. I've been on the street since I was 15. I quit school in the 8th grade. My family hates me. Bonnie, my girlfriend, won't marry me because I ain't got a full-time job. So would you rather be dead, huh? Danny looked down at his feet and shrugged. Maybe. Well, look at it this way. If you had died last night, you wouldn't have met me this afternoon, right? And we wouldn't have fucked on the 4-poster bed the way we did. That was something to live for, wasn't it? Danny took a long drag on the joint and handed it to her. She was sitting on the side of him that had the Confederate flag tattoo. He leaned against her and uttered a low growl. "Well, was it?" she asked. "Yeah, it was worth living for," he said, "but only if there's more where that came from." He slid his arm around her waist and kissed the back of her neck, growing softly and nibbling at her like a playful lion cub. She felt a tingle of pleasure. In a moment he was stroking her knee, rubbing her thigh, lifting her off the pedestal, and lowering her onto the ground. She squealed as he rolled on top of her. He lay lightly on her, supporting himself by his elbows to keep from pressing her too hard against the ground. Dry leaves crackled beneath them. She began to moan, louder and louder. Suddenly he clapped his hand over her mouth and froze motionless. Startled, she looked up and saw that he had lifted his head. He was peering out through the bushes. She could feel his heart pounding. He lay absolutely still, not moving a muscle. She heard voices. People were approaching. She turned her head and saw several pairs of legs walking along a path that would bring them to within a few feet of where they lay. She and Danny were only partly covered by the bushes. If the people looked in their direction as they passed, they would surely see them. She heard a middle-aged woman speaking in a complaining voice. Perpetual care means just what it says. It means taking care of things in perpetuity. Like pulling out weeds and sweeping up debris. Forever, I'm going to stop at the guardhouse and have a word with the groundskeeper before we leave. They were 20 feet away now and coming closer. A man's voice replied, "They do a pretty fair job compared to most places. Anyhow, I can't imagine Granny minds a few weeds or a couple of twigs lying around." "Well, I do mind," the woman persisted, "and I want to know that when I'm laid to rest, someone will tend the plots in perpetuity, and they've been paid to do so." The legs were walking right by them now. Corinne held her breath. "Suit yourself," said the man. "We'll wait for you in the car." They had passed. They had not noticed. Danny relaxed his grip on Corinne's mouth and resumed having sex as easily as if he was picking up a conversation dropped in mid-sentence. Corinne was swept away by his staying power and by his ability throughout the entire terrifying interruption to maintain a rock-hard erection. On the way back to the car, he walked with a spring in his step. Corinne took his hands in hers. She had rescued him from morbid thoughts, and that pleased her. He was moody, all right, but what did that matter? She had found the perfect sexual playmate. He was aglow, and she was aglow, but for very different reasons, as she discovered when he turned to her in the car and asked, "Will you marry me?" She was not so much taken aback as surprised at the absurdity of it. "But we just met 3 hours ago," she said. She started to laugh, but she realized almost at once, when she saw his expression suddenly turn grim, that his offer had been heartfelt. She had wounded him. "You're going to marry one of them 2 assholes at the beach, aren't you?" he said softly. "No," she said. "I don't even know them well enough either." "Sure you do. They got money. They got an education. What else do you need to know?" She had hurt him deeply, and she was crushed. She was touched that he was so desperate to be loved. "I had a wonderful time today," she said gently. "I really did. But you won't marry me. You'll never marry me." She struggled for words. "Well, but I certainly want to see you again. I mean, we can get together often, and we can." She did not see the back of his hand coming at her until it struck her, a glancing blow on the cheek. It would have landed with more force, but Danny had floored the accelerator at the same moment and swung sharply onto Albicorn Street, throwing her against the door and out of reach. They roared south on Albicorn, swerving from lane to lane, passing one car after another. It was getting dark. Corinne cowered as far away from him as she could get. Her cheek felt numb. "Please take me home," she pleaded. "When I'm goddamn pissed off now, and I'm goddamn good and ready, I'll take you home," he snapped. They sped south. 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles. They sailed past the mall, past Armstrong State College. Corinne felt dizzy. She could think only of Danny's death wish, and that now he would kill them both. Surely the vodka, the pina coladas, and the marijuana had taken their toll. He would drive off the road. He would slam into another car. She was frightened just looking at him. He was so utterly changed. His jaw was set. A diabolical fire lit his eyes. He held the wheel in a ferocious grip. It all seemed like a horrible, surreal nightmare. Suddenly his image began to flicker before her eyes. The back of his head, his shoulders, his arms, his face, his whole body, as if caught in the beam of a stroboscopic light. She was about to lose consciousness when she heard sirens. It was the police. The rage drained out of Danny as quickly as it had flared up. He lifted his foot off the gas and pulled over onto the shoulder. 3 squad cars quickly hemmed him in, blue lights flashing. The crackle of 2-way radios filled the air. The policeman shouted at Danny and ordered him out of the car. He turned imploringly to Corinne, his face once again sweet, his voice childlike. "Get me out of this, will you?" They did not see each other again after that. Corinne was still shaken by their encounter months later when she told me about it in Clary's drugstore. She had made mistakes before, she said, and she would make them again. But not like this, she hoped. She had watched Danny from afar, for months, studying him, worshipping him, stalked him, and all that time it never entered her mind that he might turn out to be so volatile. She had thought of him only as a walking streak of sex, and about that at least she had not been wrong.